The wind howled like a hungry wolf, tearing at Jedediah's thick beard as he trudged through the knee-deep snow. He was a mountain man through and through. Solitude was his companion, the rustling pines his confidants. He knew these mountains like the back of his calloused hand, every hidden trail, every frozen creek. His life was a tapestry woven with hardship and resilience. He hunted for survival, trapped for trade, and lived by a code etched in the unforgiving landscape. Respect the wilderness, and it might just respect you back. He felt more at home amongst the towering peaks than he ever did in a crowded town. The silence of the mountains was a balm to his soul, a stark contrast to the clamor of civilization he had long left behind. But even a man as weathered and independent as Jedediah couldn't ignore the fury of an approaching blizzard. The sky, once a clear, crisp blue, was now a swirling canvas of gray and white, threatening to swallow him whole. He needed shelter, and fast. He remembered a small cave, a mere indentation in the rock face, a few miles north. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He pulled his fur hat tighter and pressed on, the wind biting at his exposed skin. The blizzard intensified with every step. The wind, a relentless tormentor, whipped snowflakes into a blinding frenzy. Visibility dropped to near zero. Jedediah relied on his instincts, his knowledge of the land, and the faint memory of the cave's location. Each gust threatened to knock him off his feet. Each drift of snow hid treacherous dips and rises. He stumbled more than once, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold seeped into his bones, a chilling reminder of the mountain's indifference. He knew hypothermia was a real threat, and he couldn't afford to slow down. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spotted it, a dark smudge against the white expanse. The cave. Relief washed over him, a brief respite from the relentless storm. He quickened his pace, his boots crunching through the snow. He reached the opening, a narrow fissure in the rock face, and squeezed inside, grateful for any shelter the mountain offered. He was safe, for now, from the worst of the storm. The cave was small and damp, but it offered a crucial barrier against the wind. Jedediah shook the snow from his coat and started gathering fallen branches and dry leaves for a fire. He knew he couldn't stay idle. Keeping warm was paramount. As the flames flickered to life, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls, he noticed something. Just beyond the entrance, almost completely buried in the snow, was a figure. At first, he thought it was a snowdrift, oddly shaped. But as he peered closer, the firelight illuminated a shock of dark hair, a pale hand half covered in snow. It was a woman. He rushed outside, his heart pounding in his chest. He knelt beside her, his rough hands gently brushing the snow from her face. Her skin was ice cold, her lips blue. She was barely breathing. He had to act fast. He couldn't leave her to die in the snow. He carefully lifted her frail body and carried her into the cave, his mind racing with what to do next. His solitude was shattered. Inside the cave, Jedediah laid the woman gently near the fire. He worked quickly, removing her snow-soaked clothes and wrapping her in his own thick furs. He had a small flask of whiskey tucked away for emergencies. He carefully trickled a few drops between her frozen lips. He had no medical training, but he knew the basics of survival. He had to get her warm and fast. He rubbed her hands and feet, trying to stimulate circulation. He piled more wood on the fire, the flames leaping higher, casting a warm glow on her face. He watched her intently, his brow furrowed with concern. He was a man of the mountains, not a healer, but he couldn't just stand by and let her die. He knew the odds were stacked against them. The blizzard raged outside, trapping them in the small cave. He had limited supplies, and the nearest town was days away. But he wouldn't give up. He would fight for her life, just as he fought for his own against the harsh realities of the wilderness. He sat beside her, a silent vigil, waiting for any sign of improvement. Hours passed. The fire crackled, a fragile beacon against the howling wind. Jedediah continued his vigil, his gaze fixed on the woman's pale face. He battled not only the elements, but also a growing unease within himself. He was a loner, a man who shunned company. He had deliberately chosen this life of solitude. Why was he risking his own safety for a stranger? Doubts gnawed at him. Was he foolish to get involved? Maybe he should have just left her. The mountains wouldn't have judged him. They wouldn't have cared. But he couldn't shake the image of her lifeless body being swallowed by the snow. Then, a faint stirring. Her eyelids fluttered. She moaned softly, her lips moving as if trying to speak. Jedediah leaned closer, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She was alive. But what would she say? What secrets did she carry? He held his breath, waiting for her to awaken. The storm raged on, a fitting backdrop to the mystery unfolding within the small cave. Her eyes flickered open, unfocused and glazed with fever. She stared blankly at the cave's ceiling, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Water," she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. Jedediah quickly offered her some water from his canteen, supporting her head as she drank. "Thank you," she murmured, her gaze still distant. "Where? Where am I?" "You're safe," Jedediah replied, his voice gruff but reassuring. "In a cave. A blizzard hit." She closed her eyes, as if trying to piece together the fragmented memories. "The men, they're still after me," she mumbled, her words slurred and disjointed. "They want the map." Jedediah frowned. "Map? What map?" He listened intently, trying to make sense of her delirious ramblings. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body trembling with cold and exhaustion. He knew he had to be patient. He needed to understand what she was saying, what danger she was in. He gently wiped her brow, whispering, "Rest now. You're safe here." He learned her name was Sarah, a whisper lost in the wind. Over the next few hours, as Sarah's fever ebbed slightly, more of her story emerged, piecemeal and fragmented. She spoke of ruthless men, led by a cruel man named Silas, who had terrorized her town. They were after something valuable, and they wouldn't stop at anything to get it. She had overheard their plans, discovered their brutality, and realized she had to escape. She knew she couldn't stay and risk the lives of others. She spoke of a daring escape under the cover of darkness, of stolen horses and treacherous terrain. She had been running for days, barely one step ahead of her pursuers. The blizzard had been her undoing, slowing her down, leaving her vulnerable. Jedediah listened, his expression grim. He knew the kind of men Sarah described. He had encountered them before, greedy, heartless individuals who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. He began to understand the danger she was in and the danger he was now in by association. He felt a growing sense of responsibility to protect her. The solitude he craved now seemed a distant memory. "The map," Sarah whispered, her voice stronger now, though still weak. "It's sewn into the lining of my coat." Jedediah carefully retrieved her coat, the one he had taken off her hours ago. He examined it closely, his fingers tracing the seams. He found it, a crude, hand-drawn map stitched into the fabric, hidden from view. He recognized some of the landmarks, the jagged peaks, the winding river. It was a map of this very mountain range. "What is it a map to?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah hesitated, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Gold," she said finally. "A gold mine, hidden deep in these mountains. Silas believes it's the key to his power." Jedediah stared at the map, his mind racing. Gold. He had never been driven by greed, but the lure of wealth was undeniable. A gold mine could change everything. But he also knew the kind of men who sought such things. They were dangerous, ruthless, and willing to kill for their prize. He had a choice to make: protect Sarah and risk his own life, or turn his back and let her face her fate alone. And there was the gold, a glittering temptation, whispering promises of a different life. Jedediah stared into the fire, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The gold mine was a powerful temptation, a chance to escape the harsh realities of his solitary existence. He could use the wealth to build a comfortable life, maybe even leave the mountains behind. But he knew that chasing the gold would mean embracing danger, attracting the attention of men like Silas. He had seen the darkness such greed could unleash, the destruction it could leave in its wake. And then there was Sarah. He couldn't deny the growing compassion he felt for her. She was vulnerable, hunted, and desperately needed his help. His desire for solitude, for the peaceful rhythm of the mountains, was strong. It was the life he had chosen, the life he cherished. But could he truly turn his back on someone in need? Could he live with the guilt of knowing he could have helped, but chose not to? The weight of his decision pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. The fire crackled, mirroring the turmoil within his soul. He knew his life would never be the same. The next morning, Jedediah awoke to an unfamiliar silence. The howling wind had ceased, and the blizzard had passed. Sunlight streamed into the cave, illuminating the snow-covered landscape. He stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the crisp, clean air. The mountain stood tall and majestic, bathed in the golden light of dawn. He turned back to Sarah, who was still weak but conscious. He had made his decision. He couldn't leave her to face Silas and his men alone. He would help her reach the nearest town, where she could find safety and protection. He would put aside his own desires and focus on getting her safety. "The storm's past," he said, his voice firm. "We'll head to Oakhaven. It's a few days' ride. I'll get you there." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jedediah," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay you." "Just get well," he replied, turning to gather their supplies. He knew the journey would be perilous, but he was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. He was a mountain man, and he would protect her. The lure of gold was now secondary to his commitment to ensuring Sarah's safety. They set off, Jedediah leading the way, his rifle slung across his back. Sarah, still weak, rode on a spare horse, her face pale but determined. The wilderness was both beautiful and unforgiving. Towering pines lined their path, their branches heavy with snow. Frozen streams crisscrossed the landscape, requiring careful navigation. But the dangers of the wilderness were not their only concern. Jedediah knew that Silas and his men wouldn't give up easily. They would be tracking them, relentless in their pursuit. He kept a watchful eye on their back trail, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. He taught Sarah how to read the signs of the wilderness, how to spot broken branches or disturbed snow that could indicate someone had passed through. He showed her how to use a rifle, how to defend herself if necessary. He was preparing her for the worst, hoping it wouldn't come to that. The journey to Oakhaven was a race against time, a desperate attempt to outrun the shadows that were closing in. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl, sent a shiver of apprehension down their spines. They were not alone. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Flashback. Sarah remembered the day Silas arrived in Harmony Creek. He rode in with his gang, all hard faces and menacing stares. They claimed to be looking for opportunity, but their intentions were clear from the start. They wanted to control everything. Her father, the town's blacksmith, had stood up to them. He refused to be intimidated, refused to give in to their demands. But Silas was relentless. He used threats, intimidation, and eventually violence. He terrorized the town, turning neighbor against neighbor. Then he discovered the old map, an heirloom passed down through Sarah's family. He believed it led to a fortune in gold, a fortune he could use to solidify his power. But Sarah knew the truth. The gold wasn't just about wealth. It was about survival. It was the last hope for her people, a Native American tribe who had been driven from their land, their resources stolen. The gold was meant to help them rebuild, to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. That's why she couldn't let Silas get his hands on it. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. As they traveled, Jedediah continued to impart his knowledge of the wilderness to Sarah. He taught her how to build a fire quickly, even in damp conditions. He showed her how to identify edible plants and how to track animals. He even taught her how to set snares, though he hoped they wouldn't need them. Sarah was a quick learner, eager to absorb his every lesson. She was resilient and resourceful, despite her ordeal. Jedediah found himself respecting her strength and determination. He began to see beyond the fragile woman he had found in the snow. He saw a fighter, a survivor. As they shared stories and faced challenges together, a bond began to form between them. He learned about her life in Harmony Creek, her dreams, and her hopes for the future. She, in turn, learned about his past, his reasons for seeking solitude, and his deep connection to the mountains. The shared experience of their journey, the constant threat of danger, and the growing respect for each other forged a connection that neither of them could have anticipated. The silence between them became comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. The ambush came suddenly, without warning. Jedediah had been so focused on the trail that he hadn't noticed the subtle signs, the broken twig, the disturbed earth. They were riding through a narrow canyon, the steep walls offering little room for maneuver. Suddenly, shots rang out, echoing through the canyon. Jedediah reacted instantly, pulling Sarah from her horse and taking cover behind a large boulder. He returned fire, his aim precise and deadly. Silas and his men were hidden among the rocks above, using the terrain to their advantage. "Stay down," Jedediah shouted to Sarah, his voice grim. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dust and stone. It was a tense standoff, a deadly game of cat and mouse. Jedediah knew they were outnumbered, but he wouldn't back down. He would protect Sarah, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. He scanned the terrain, looking for a way out, a way to turn the tables on their attackers. Their escape depended on his skill and his courage. The fate of the map and Sarah's people hung in the balance. Jedediah knew he couldn't win a straight-up gunfight. He had to use his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage. He remembered a narrow crevice he had seen earlier, a passage that led to the top of the canyon. It was a risky move, but it was their only chance. "I'm going to create a diversion," he told Sarah. "When I do, make a run for that crevice. Can you do it?" Sarah nodded, her face pale but resolute. Jedediah took a deep breath and charged out from behind the boulder, firing his rifle as he ran. Silas and his men turned their attention to him, unleashing a hail of bullets. Sarah seized her opportunity and scrambled towards the crevice, her movements swift and agile. Jedediah managed to draw the attackers away from Sarah, giving her a precious head start. But as she reached the crevice, a bullet struck her in the arm. She cried out in pain, stumbling but managing to reach the safety of a narrow passage. Jedediah, seeing her injured, knew he had to get to her quickly. He fought his way towards the crevice, dodging bullets and returning fire, his heart pounding with fear for Sarah's safety. After a harrowing climb through the crevice, they managed to escape Silas and his men. Jedediah knew they couldn't stay in the canyon. They needed shelter, a place to rest, and tend to Sarah's wound. He remembered an abandoned cabin a few miles north, a place he had used in the past during hunting trips. They rode through the forest, the trees offering some cover from the relentless sun. Sarah's face was pale with pain, but she remained stoic, her grip tight on the reins. Finally, they reached the cabin, a dilapidated structure but offering much-needed protection from the elements. Jedediah helped Sarah dismount and led her inside. The cabin was dusty and neglected, but it was dry and secure. He quickly started a fire, providing warmth and light. Then, he turned his attention to Sarah's wound. He cleaned it with water and bandaged it with strips of cloth. He knew the bullet had to come out, but he didn't have the tools or the expertise. He could only do his best to prevent infection and ease her pain. He watched her closely, his heart heavy with concern. He was a mountain man, not a doctor, but he would do everything in his power to help her heal. As Sarah rested, her eyes filled with a deep sadness, she finally revealed the full truth about the gold. "It's not mine, Jedediah," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was stolen from my people." Jedediah looked at her, surprised. "Your people?" "The Lakota," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Silas and his men raided their village, slaughtered their warriors, and stole everything they had, including the map to their sacred gold mine. The gold is not just about wealth. It's about their survival, their future. It belongs to them." She explained how her mother was Lakota and her father was white. She had been raised with stories of her mother's people. She knew she had to do everything she could to return what was stolen. That was why she risked everything to escape with the map. She needed to get the map back to her people so they could reclaim the gold and rebuild their lives. It was more important than her own life. The gold represented not greed, but justice and hope. Jedediah sat in silence, the fire casting flickering shadows on his face. Sarah's words hung heavy in the air. The gold wasn't just a treasure to be claimed. It was a symbol of injustice, a reminder of the suffering inflicted upon the Lakota people. He wrestled with a moral dilemma. Part of him still yearned for the wealth the gold could bring. He could use it to escape his hardscrabble life, to build a better future for himself. He could finally leave these mountains and experience a life of comfort and ease. But could he live with himself if he kept the gold, knowing it rightfully belonged to the Lakota? Could he turn a blind eye to their suffering, knowing he had the power to help them? The weight of his decision pressed down on him, heavy and unforgiving. He looked at Sarah, her face etched with pain and determination. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't let greed cloud his judgment. He had to do what was right, even if it meant sacrificing his own dreams. The gold had to be returned. A memory flickered in Jedediah's mind, a scene from his youth that he had long tried to bury. He remembered witnessing the forced removal of a peaceful tribe from their ancestral lands. He had been just a boy, but the injustice of it all had burned into his soul. He had seen the tears in their eyes, the despair on their faces as they were driven from their homes, their possessions stolen, their lives shattered. He had felt powerless then, unable to do anything to help. But now, he had a chance to make amends, to right a wrong. He couldn't let the same thing happen to Sarah's people. He couldn't allow Silas and his men to profit from their suffering. The memory of that past injustice fueled his decision, strengthening his resolve to return the gold to its rightful owners. It was more than just a moral obligation. It was a personal one. He owed it to those who had been wronged, to those who had been silenced. He would not let history repeat itself. "We're not going to Oakhaven," Jedediah announced, his voice resolute. "We're going to return the map to your people." Sarah looked at him, her eyes widening with surprise and gratitude. "Are you sure, Jedediah? It's dangerous." "It's the right thing to do," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Besides, I owe them." He knew the journey to the Lakota territory would be even more perilous than heading to Oakhaven. They would be venturing into unfamiliar lands, and they would still have Silas and his men on their trail. But he was determined. He would not rest until the map was safely back in the hands of its rightful owners. They changed course, turning away from the well-worn path to Oakhaven and heading west towards the setting sun. The landscape became more rugged, the terrain more challenging. But with each step, Jedediah felt a sense of purpose, a sense of redemption. He was finally doing something meaningful, something that truly mattered. He glanced at Sarah, her face etched with hope. He knew they were facing a difficult road ahead, but he was ready. They were on a mission of justice, and they would not fail. As they pressed westward, Jedediah became increasingly vigilant. He knew Silas wouldn't give up easily, and he had a feeling they were getting closer. He scanned the horizon, studying the terrain, searching for any sign of pursuit. Then he saw it, a broken branch deliberately snapped. A horseshoe print, fresher than the others. A discarded cigarette, but the same brand Silas smoked. They were closing in. "They're getting closer," Jedediah said grimly, pointing to the signs. "We need to be careful." Sarah's face paled. "What do we do?" "We set a trap," Jedediah replied, his eyes hardening. "We make them think we're heading one way, then we double back. We use their eagerness against them." He knew it was a risky strategy, but they had no choice. They were outgunned and outnumbered, and Sarah was still injured. They had to outsmart Silas and his men, to lure them into a trap where they could be dealt with once and for all. The final confrontation was looming, and Jedediah knew it would be a fight for survival. He had to protect Sarah, to ensure that the map reached her people. The stakes were higher than ever. Jedediah chose a narrow ravine, hidden by thick brush, as the location for their trap. He knew Silas would be eager to catch them, and he would likely rush in without thinking. Jedediah used his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage, setting snares and tripwires, creating a deadly gauntlet for their pursuers. He positioned Sarah in a hidden spot where she could provide cover fire if needed. He gave her clear instructions, emphasizing the importance of staying hidden and only firing if absolutely necessary. He didn't want her to get hurt again. As darkness fell, Jedediah checked his rifle, ensuring it was clean and loaded. He sharpened his knife, his movements precise and deliberate. He was a mountain man, a survivor, and he would not go down without a fight. He was prepared to face Silas and his men, to protect Sarah, and to ensure that the map reached its destination. He knew this could be his last stand, but he was ready. He was fighting for something bigger than himself, something worth dying for. The fate of the Lakota people rested on his shoulders. The attack came at first light. Silas and his men, blinded by greed and driven by desperation, charged into the ravine, falling right into Jedediah's trap. Snares snapped, sending men sprawling. Tripwires triggered, unleashing a hail of rocks and debris. The ravine erupted in chaos. Gunfire echoed through the trees, the air thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Jedediah moved like a phantom, picking off Silas's men one by one. He used the terrain to his advantage, disappearing and reappearing, confusing and disorienting his enemies. Silas, enraged, emerged from the chaos, his eyes burning with hatred. He spotted Jedediah and charged towards him, firing his pistol. Jedediah dodged the bullets and lunged forward, tackling Silas to the ground. They wrestled, a desperate struggle for survival. The fate of the map and Sarah's people hung in the balance. The climactic showdown had begun, a brutal and unforgiving fight to the finish. The mountains held their breath, waiting to see who would emerge victorious. Jedediah and Silas grappled in the dirt, each man fighting for his life. Silas, fueled by greed and desperation, fought with a ferocity that surprised Jedediah. But Jedediah was stronger, more determined. He managed to overpower Silas, disarming him and pinning him to the ground. He raised his knife, ready to deliver the final blow. But at the last moment, he hesitated. He wasn't a killer. He was a survivor. He lowered the knife and knocked Silas unconscious with the butt of his pistol. With Silas defeated, the remaining members of his gang scattered, fleeing into the wilderness. The battle was over. Jedediah had won. But victory came at a cost. As he stood up, a sharp pain shot through his side. He looked down and saw blood seeping through his shirt. He had been shot. The bullet had pierced his side, narrowly missing his heart. He stumbled, his vision blurring. He had defeated Silas and his men, but he was seriously wounded. He knew he needed help, and fast. He managed to make his way back to Sarah, his strength failing with every step. The mission was almost complete, but his own survival was now in question. Sarah rushed to Jedediah's side, her face etched with fear and concern. She examined his wound, her hands trembling. She knew he needed help, and fast. "I know the way," she said, her voice determined. "I know how to get to the village." Jedediah, his strength fading, nodded weakly. He trusted her. He knew she would lead them to safety. Despite her own injuries, Sarah helped Jedediah onto his horse. She took the reins and guided the horse through the forest, her knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. She knew the hidden trails, the secret passages that only her people knew. She navigated through the wilderness with confidence, her determination fueled by the need to save Jedediah's life. The journey was slow and arduous, but Sarah pressed on, her resolve unwavering. She knew her people were their only hope. She had to get Jedediah to the village, where he could receive the medical attention he desperately needed. She was no longer just a woman fleeing for her life. She was a guide, a protector, a savior. The roles had reversed, and now it was her turn to lead. After days of arduous travel, they finally arrived at the Lakota village, nestled in a hidden valley, surrounded by towering mountains. As they approached, the villagers emerged, their faces etched with curiosity and suspicion. But when they saw Sarah, their expressions changed. They recognized her, their eyes widening with surprise and joy. Sarah spoke to them in their native tongue, explaining what had happened, telling them about the map, about Silas, and about Jedediah's sacrifice. The villagers listened intently, their faces filled with a mixture of grief and gratitude. They welcomed Sarah with open arms, embracing her as one of their own. They carefully helped Jedediah from his horse and carried him to a nearby tent, where their medicine woman began to tend to his wound. They used ancient remedies and traditional healing techniques, working tirelessly to save his life. Jedediah was in good hands. He had brought Sarah home, and now her people would repay the debt. He was safe, at least for now. The journey had been long and dangerous, but they had finally reached their destination. As Jedediah lay recovering, Sarah presented the map to the tribal elders. A hush fell over the village as they gathered around, their eyes fixed on the crude drawing that held the key to their future. They recognized the landmarks, the sacred mountains, the hidden valley where their ancestors had mined the gold for generations. A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. They had almost given up hope of ever reclaiming their stolen heritage, of ever rebuilding their shattered lives. But now, thanks to Sarah's courage and Jedediah's sacrifice, they had a chance. A celebration erupted, filling the village with music, dancing, and laughter. They honored Sarah as a hero, a savior who had risked everything to return what was rightfully theirs. They vowed to use the gold to rebuild their village, to educate their children, and to ensure a brighter future for generations to come. The map was more than just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of courage and compassion. The Lakota people were finally on the path to healing and reclaiming their stolen destiny. After several days, Jedediah's wound began to heal, thanks to the skillful care of the Lakota medicine woman. He regained his strength, but he knew it was time for him to leave. He had fulfilled his purpose. He had helped Sarah return the map to her people. His journey was complete. He prepared to bid farewell to Sarah and the Lakota people. He was grateful for their kindness and hospitality, but he knew he didn't belong there. He was a mountain man, a loner. His place was in the wilderness, among the towering peaks and the whispering pines. But something had changed within him. His solitude was no longer the same. It was now colored by the connections he had made, by the experiences he had shared. He had discovered a capacity for compassion and a sense of purpose he never knew he possessed. He was still a solitary man, but he was no longer alone. He carried the memories of his journey with him, a reminder of the woman he had found in the snow and the secret that had changed everything. As Jedediah prepared to leave, Sarah approached him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "You don't have to go, Jedediah," she said softly. "You have a place here with my people. We would welcome you." She spoke of a life beyond the mountains, a life filled with community, purpose, and connection. She spoke of the Lakota way of life, of their respect for nature, their strong family bonds, and their deep spirituality. She offered him a chance to be a part of something bigger than himself, to find a home among her people. Jedediah looked at her, his heart touched by her offer. He had never considered such a thing. He had always been a loner, a man who shunned company. But he couldn't deny the pull he felt towards Sarah and her people. He had witnessed their strength, their resilience, and their unwavering spirit. He had seen the joy on their faces when they received the map, the hope that had been rekindled in their hearts. He knew he could find happiness and fulfillment among them. But could he truly give up his solitary life, his connection to the wilderness? The decision weighed heavily on his soul. Jedediah spent the night wrestling with his decision. He lay awake, staring at the stars, listening to the sounds of the village. He thought about his past, the loneliness, the hardship, the constant struggle for survival. He thought about his future, the possibility of companionship, of belonging, of finding a purpose beyond himself. He thought about Sarah, her courage, her compassion, her unwavering spirit. He knew he cared for her deeply, and he knew he could find happiness with her. But he also knew that he was a mountain man, a creature of the wilderness. His soul was intertwined with the towering peaks, the whispering pines, the solitude of the mountains. He knew he could never truly be happy confined to a village, no matter how welcoming the people. He needed the freedom of the open sky, the challenge of the untamed wilderness. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, he made his choice. He would return to the mountains, to the life he knew, but he would never forget Sarah, or the Lakota people, or the journey that had changed him forever. His solitude would now be a choice, not a sentence. The next morning, Jedediah saddled his horse, his heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and anticipation. He bid farewell to the Lakota people, thanking them for their kindness and promising to never forget them. He turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you," he said softly. "You changed my life." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "And you changed mine, Jedediah. Be safe." He mounted his horse and turned towards the setting sun. He rode away from the village, away from Sarah, away from the possibility of a new life. But as he rode, he knew he was not the same man who had entered that cave weeks ago. He was a changed man, forever marked by the woman in the snow and her secret. He carried with him a newfound sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of himself, and a connection to something bigger than his own solitude. He was still a mountain man, but he was now a mountain man with a heart. As he rode off into the sunset, the mountains welcomed him home, their silence now echoing with the memories of his journey.